The morning sunlight spilled across the busy streets of Brooklyn, glinting off the polished surfaces of cars parked outside Carter Automotive. Andrew Carter stepped out of his car and adjusted the baseball cap on his head, pulling it lower to conceal his face. Dressed in faded jeans and a plain button-down shirt, he looked nothing like the CEO of a successful dealership chain. To everyone else, he was just another middle-aged man browsing for a car. And that was exactly what he wanted. Andrew took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the rows of vehicles. Despite the familiar surroundings, the air felt different today. He had built Carter Automotive from the ground up, pouring years of hard work into making it a trusted name. But lately, cracks had begun to show. Customer complaints had surfaced. Stories of pushy sales tactics, hidden fees, and dishonest dealings. Numbers on reports painted a rosy picture, but Andrew knew better. Numbers didn't reveal the truth about people. Inside the glass-walled showroom, salesmen in sharp suits greeted potential buyers with practiced smiles and calculated charm. Andrew stepped in, the buzz of conversation and the clicking of keyboards creating a rhythm he used to know well. Now, as he blended into the crowd, he felt the growing distance between himself and the day-to-day operations of his business. It was time to see things for himself. As he wandered through the showroom, Andrew's attention was drawn to a conversation at the far end of the floor. A tall, silver-haired man stood with his wife, their postures tight and uneasy. They were clearly uncomfortable as they spoke to a salesman, Cody Miller. Andrew recognized Cody instantly, the manager of this dealership, hand-picked years ago for his ability to close deals. Cody's polished demeanor and broad grin looked perfect from a distance, but Andrew could sense something off. "We've had this car for over 10 years, the elderly man said, his voice strained. "It belonged to our son before he passed away." Andrew moved closer, pretending to inspect a nearby sedan while keeping his ears tuned to the conversation. The man's voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. "We've kept it in good condition, but we just can't afford the repairs anymore. We were hoping for something reasonable." Cody shrugged, glancing briefly at the aging sedan parked outside. "I understand, sir," he said, his tone professional but detached. "But the market value is what it is. I can offer you $2,000 for it. That's already generous, considering its age and mileage." The elderly woman's hand tightened around her husband's arm, her face lined with worry. "But this car means so much to us," she said softly, tears threatening to surface. "It's all we have left of him." Cody offered a practiced, sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I wish I could do more, but sentimental value doesn't translate to dollars. This is the best offer I can make." Andrew's jaw tightened. He had heard enough. Andrew stepped forward, his movements deliberate yet casual, as if he had been wandering the showroom and just happened upon the scene. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but carrying a quiet authority. Cody turned to him, his expression shifting briefly to irritation, before quickly snapping back into a salesman's practiced politeness. "Can I help you, sir?" Cody asked, the faintest edge in his tone. Andrew gestured toward the elderly couple and the car they were trading in. "I couldn't help but overhear. That sedan out there, it caught my eye. Is it already being traded in?" The couple looked at Andrew in surprise, while Cody's gaze narrowed slightly. "Yes, sir," Cody said cautiously. "It's part of a trade-in deal. Why do you ask?" Andrew stroked his chin as though considering. "I might be interested in buying it directly. What's the trade-in value?" Cody hesitated, his confidence faltering for a fraction of a second. "We're offering $2,000, he said, straightening his posture as though the number was a badge of honor. Andrew tilted his head, his expression calm but firm. 2,000? For a car in that condition? Seems a little low." The elderly man, Felix, spoke up, his voice filled with quiet frustration. "We've taken care of that car for years. It's more than just some trade-in to us." Andrew gave a small, understanding nod. He turned back to Cody, his gaze unflinching. "How about I offer $5,000 for it instead?" The room seemed to freeze. The elderly woman gasped softly, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh no, we couldn't possibly," she began, but Andrew raised a hand gently, stopping her. "Let's step outside," Andrew said to the couple. "I'd like to hear more about the car and about your son." Cody's face flushed, his jaw tightening, as Andrew guided the couple away from the polished showroom and into the open air of the lot. Away from the sterile atmosphere, the Browns opened up. Felix spoke of their son, a firefighter who had lost his life in the line of duty. The car had been his pride and joy, a constant reminder of his bravery and love for his family. But with medical bills piling up and their own health declining, they had no choice but to part with it. Andrew listened intently, his expression softening with each word. When Felix finished, Andrew nodded. "I'll buy it from you for $5,000, he said simply. "Not because of its market value, but because it deserves to stay a part of your son's story. I'll restore it and keep it in his memory." The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Thank you. Thank you so much." Andrew reached into his pocket, pulling out his checkbook and writing the amount on the spot. He handed the check to Felix, who hesitated before shaking Andrew's hand firmly, gratitude etched deeply into his weathered features. As the Browns walked away, visibly lighter with relief, Cody stormed out of the showroom, his face red with frustration. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snapped, his voice barely restrained. Andrew's calm demeanor didn't falter. He slid his hands into his pockets and turned to Cody. "Helping a customer," he said evenly. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" The unspoken tension between them hung heavy in the air. Cody clenched his fists, clearly wanting to say more but holding himself back. Andrew kept his gaze steady, the quiet authority of someone who had nothing to prove but everything to change. The moment passed, and Cody retreated back into the building. Andrew remained where he stood, looking out at the lot, his mind already turning over everything he had seen and heard that day. He had come here undercover to observe, but now he knew change wasn't optional. It was a necessity. With a final glance at the Browns' car, Andrew turned back toward the showroom. This was only the beginning. He wasn't just here to watch anymore. He was here to act. The next morning, Andrew arrived at the dealership early, blending into the flow of employees arriving for the day. He parked his car across the street, taking a moment to watch from a distance. The Carter Automotive logo shone brightly above the entrance, a symbol of the business he had built over decades. Yet now, it felt like a facade, a shiny exterior masking the cracks beneath. He had seen enough yesterday to know the rot went deeper than Cody Miller. The system itself was broken, and it was his responsibility to fix it. Stepping into the showroom, Andrew adopted his undercover persona once again. The air was filled with the hum of activity, conversations between salesmen and customers, the click of keyboards, and the faint sound of a printer churning out contracts. As he wandered among the rows of cars, Andrew kept his ears open, listening for the details that reports never captured. His attention was drawn to a young salesman speaking with a nervous-looking woman. The salesman, Daniel Lopez, was one of the newer hires. Andrew had noticed him yesterday. His honesty and discomfort under Cody's aggressive leadership had been clear. Now Daniel was explaining financing options to the woman, Rebecca Thompson, who seemed uneasy about the process. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, her voice uncertain. "That monthly payment is higher than I expected. Are there any hidden fees I should know about? Daniel hesitated, glancing toward the office where Cody used to sit. Andrew could see the conflict on his face, the hesitation of someone torn between following instructions and doing what felt right. Well, Daniel began carefully, there's an extended warranty included. It's optional though, so we can remove it if you don't want it. Rebecca frowned. Nobody mentioned that before. Andrew stepped closer, pretending to inspect a nearby car while keeping his focus on their conversation. He watched as Daniel took a deep breath, his next words carrying an undertone of sincerity. I'm sorry about that. Let me adjust the numbers for you so everything is clear. Rebecca nodded, relief flickering across her face. Daniel typed something into his computer, printing out a revised contract. Here, he said, handing it to her. This shows exactly what you'll be paying without any extras. Andrew felt a small spark of hope. Daniel was a young man, still finding his footing, but his instincts were in the right place. It was proof that not everyone had been corrupted by the dealership's old ways. However, it was clear Daniel needed guidance, a mentor who could help him navigate the pressure and stay true to his principles. Rebecca scanned the new contract and smiled. Thank you. This makes much more sense. Andrew's focus shifted as he noticed another group of salesmen huddled near the coffee machine, their voices low, but their tone unmistakable. Curious, he moved closer, catching snippets of their conversation. Since Cody's gone, what do you think's going to happen now? One of them asked. Another salesman snorted. I'll tell you what's going to happen. The new guy, whoever it is, will want results just like Cody did. Nothing's really going to change. Andrew clenched his jaw, a fresh wave of determination coursing through him. Change wasn't just a goal, it was a necessity, and he would ensure it started here. Andrew lingered near the group, pretending to examine a clipboard on a nearby desk. Their words confirmed what he feared. Cody's departure had left uncertainty, but the toxic culture he fostered still lingered. Worse, some employees seemed resigned to the idea that nothing would improve, a mindset Andrew knew could cripple progress before it even began. One of the salesmen, a middle-aged man named George Wilson, spoke up, his voice low and weary. Cody might have been a pain, but he knew how to get numbers. If we don't push like he did, we'll be out of jobs. Another nodded in agreement. Yeah, but if we don't hit targets, management's not going to care how fair we are. It's about the bottom line. Andrew's stomach tightened. George was one of his longest-serving employees, a seasoned professional who should have been a pillar of leadership. Instead, years under Cody's command had dulled his ability to challenge the status quo. But Andrew wasn't ready to give up on him, or anyone else, just yet. Stepping back into the flow of the showroom, Andrew noticed Daniel escorting Rebecca toward the exit, her signed contract in hand. As they passed, Andrew caught Daniel's eye and gave him a small nod of approval. Daniel hesitated briefly, then returned the gesture with a tentative smile. It was a small moment, but it reminded Andrew that there was still hope to rebuild trust, both with customers and his staff. Before Andrew could move on, a burst of laughter caught his attention. At the far end of the showroom, a man in a sharp grey suit was shaking hands with a customer. The man, whom Andrew vaguely remembered from a regional meeting, was from Langley Motors, the dealership's most aggressive competitor. The sight of him here, chatting animatedly with one of Andrew's customers, sent a wave of unease through Andrew. Langley Motors wasn't known for playing fair. As the man exited, Andrew's mind raced. This wasn't a coincidence. Langley Motors must have caught wind of the changes happening here, and Andrew could only imagine what they were planning. With tension simmering in the background, Andrew knew he had to act quickly. The time for observation was over. The next steps would determine not only the future of this dealership, but the culture of the business he had spent his life building. Andrew walked into the dealership's staff lounge later that afternoon, his footsteps echoing on the tiled floor. The murmur of conversation ceased almost instantly as the employees turned to look at him. Their faces reflected a mix of curiosity, unease, and anticipation. Andrew had decided it was time to make his presence known. He wasn't just here to observe anymore. He was here to act. He placed a hand on the back of a chair at the head of the room and leaned slightly forward, his gaze scanning the group. George Wilson, sitting near the coffee machine, shifted uncomfortably. Daniel Lopez, standing near the back, looked both confused and intrigued. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint hum of a vending machine in the corner. "Good afternoon," Andrew began, his voice steady but carrying an edge of authority. "I want to thank you all for taking a moment out of your day. I know it's not often that someone like me walks into a meeting like this, but today isn't just another day." He straightened, crossing his arms loosely over his chest. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Carter. I'm not just a customer walking through the showroom or some regional manager here to check quotas. I own this dealership. And I'm here because I've seen things that need to change, starting now." A ripple of shock passed through the room. A few employees exchanged wide-eyed glances, while others sat frozen, their expressions unreadable. George leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed defensively. Daniel's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he remained silent, his posture attentive. Andrew continued, his tone calm but firm. "Yesterday, I watched as one of our customers, a grieving couple, was treated with a complete lack of empathy. They were offered a trade-in value for their car that didn't reflect its worth, not even close. Worse, their emotional attachment to that car was dismissed like it didn't matter." His gaze hardened as he scanned the room. "That's not how I built this company. That's not how Carter Automotive is supposed to operate." The tension in the room was palpable. Andrew could see the discomfort on the faces of several employees, particularly George. Cody Miller, however, stood near the edge of the room, his arms crossed, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He clearly thought Andrew's speech was nothing more than theatrics. Andrew's eyes locked onto Cody. "And then there's the matter of leadership," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "Leadership that has prioritized profits at the expense of integrity. Leadership that has trained you to think that dishonesty is a necessary part of success." Cody's smirk disappeared, replaced by a flash of defensiveness. "With all due respect, Mr. Carter," he began, his voice carefully measured, "we're in the business of selling cars. Customers come here expecting deals. My job is to make sure they leave with one while protecting the dealership's bottom line." Andrew tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice sharp but calm. "And does protecting the bottom line require exploiting people? Does it require teaching employees to add hidden fees or push unnecessary warranties onto customers who trust us to treat them fairly?" The room was silent again, the weight of Andrew's words pressing down on everyone present. Cody's jaw tightened, and he opened his mouth to respond, but Andrew raised a hand to stop him. "You've done enough," Andrew said, his tone final. "Cody, you're fired. Pack your things and leave." The room erupted into hushed whispers as Cody stood there, his face a mixture of shock and fury. For a moment, it seemed like he might argue, but the cold finality in Andrew's tone left no room for negotiation. His fists clenched at his sides, and his eyes darted around the room, seeking allies among the employees. None of them met his gaze. "This is a mistake," Cody said, his voice low but laced with anger. "I've been here for years, driving profits, keeping this place afloat. You'll regret this." Andrew didn't flinch. His voice was steady as he replied, "What I'll regret is allowing this dealership to lose sight of what matters most. The people who walk through our doors and trust us to treat them with respect. Now gather your things and leave. Security will escort you out if necessary." Cody glared at him, but said nothing more. With a dramatic scoff, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed, leaving an uneasy silence in its wake. Andrew let the moment settle before he turned back to the employees, many of whom were now staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to cautious curiosity. He drew a deep breath and softened his tone. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, "and I know some of you may feel uncertain about what's next. Let me be clear. This isn't just about getting rid of Cody. It's about fixing a system that's been broken for far too long." George, sitting in the corner, finally spoke up, his voice hesitant but firm. "Mr. Carter, I don't disagree with you about some of the things Cody did, but this business isn't easy. If we don't hit targets, it doesn't matter how fair we are. The numbers won't lie." Andrew nodded, appreciating the honesty. "You're right, George. This business isn't easy. But here's the thing. Integrity and success aren't mutually exclusive. We can still meet our goals while treating customers fairly. It's not going to happen overnight, but I promise you this. Together, we're going to rebuild this dealership into something we can all be proud of." He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on Daniel, who stood near the back, clearly absorbing every word. "It starts with transparency," Andrew continued. "From now on, every deal we make will be straightforward. No hidden fees, no unnecessary add-ons. And to make sure we're all on the same page, we're introducing a new bonus system. Your performance will be measured not just by the numbers, but by customer satisfaction. If our customers walk away happy, we all win." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room, some employees nodding hesitantly, others looking skeptical. Andrew could sense their doubts, but he wasn't deterred. "I know it's a big change," he said, "but I believe in this team. I believe we can make this work, and I'll be here every step of the way to prove it." Daniel raised his hand tentatively. "Mr. Carter, does this mean we're starting fresh? Like, completely fresh?" Andrew smiled. "Yes, Daniel, completely fresh. And I'll be here to make sure we get it right." The employees began to nod, a sense of cautious optimism settling over the room. As they dispersed, Andrew stayed behind, watching them go. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. As he stepped out of the lounge, he spotted Daniel waiting near the showroom floor. The young salesman approached, his expression serious but hopeful. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly, "for giving us a chance to do things differently." Andrew placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "It's not just a chance, Daniel. It's a commitment." The two exchanged a small nod before parting ways. Andrew turned his focus back to the dealership, ready to begin the hard work of transformation. This was only the start, but he was determined to see it through. Beyond the glass doors, the bustling streets of Brooklyn awaited, a reminder that every change he made here would ripple outward. The future of Carter Automotive, and its reputation, was in his hands. As Andrew stepped back into the bustling showroom, the gravity of what he had just set in motion began to settle in his mind. Employees moved about with tentative energy, some glancing at him with curiosity, others still cautious. Change wasn't going to be easy, but it had to start somewhere, and Andrew was ready to lead the charge. He paused near Daniel, who was walking a customer through the financing process. Watching Daniel explain the details with clarity and patience reminded Andrew of the kind of trust he wanted to rebuild. Just as he was about to move on, George approached him, his expression guarded but thoughtful. "Mr. Carter," George began, keeping his voice low, "I'll admit, when you first walked in today, I didn't know what to think. I've been here a long time, seen people come and go. But what you said in that meeting, it stuck with me." Andrew turned to face him fully, his expression inviting honesty. And what's your take now, George? George hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. It's not that I don't want to do right by the customers. I've always tried to. But Cody, he made it clear that numbers mattered more than people. After a while, it just felt like fighting the tide. Andrew nodded, his tone steady. I get it. I can't imagine how frustrating it must have been to feel like you had to compromise your principles to keep your job. But that stops today. I need people like you, George. People who know this business and want to make it better. I can't do this alone. George's posture relaxed slightly, and for the first time a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. All right, Mr. Carter. I'm in. But just know some of the others might take a little more convincing. Andrew chuckled. That's fair. Change takes time, and trust takes even longer. But we'll get there. As George walked away, a familiar figure caught Andrew's eye near the entrance. It was the same sharply dressed man he had seen the day before, the representative from Langley Motors. He was chatting with a prospective customer, his tone smooth and confident, his gestures deliberate. Andrew's jaw tightened. Langley Motors was clearly circling like a shark, looking for any opportunity to steal business. He couldn't let them succeed, not when Carter Automotive was finally taking its first steps toward a better future. Striding toward the man, Andrew made no attempt to hide his presence. The Langley representative noticed him immediately and offered a tight smile. Mr. Carter, he said smoothly, extending a hand. Nice to see you again. Andrew didn't take the bait. What brings you here today? He asked, his tone polite but firm. The man's smile widened. Just keeping an eye on the competition. You understand how it is. Andrew held his gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I do, he said finally, and I suggest you do the same, because we're just getting started. Andrew stood at the front of the staff lounge the next morning, facing his team once again. The room was quieter than it had been the day before, the shock of his arrival and Cody's firing still fresh in everyone's minds. Despite the silence, Andrew could feel the weight of their stares, a mix of apprehension and guarded hope. I appreciate all of you being here, Andrew began, his voice calm but firm. Yesterday was a wake-up call. Not just for you, but for me as well. What I saw in this dealership didn't align with the values I built this company on. But I'm not here to dwell on the past. I'm here to talk about how we move forward. He stepped closer to the team, making eye contact with George, Daniel, and a few others who had shown flashes of potential. Change isn't going to be easy, and I won't pretend it will be. But I believe in this team. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have what it takes. Andrew gestured toward a whiteboard he'd brought into the room, filled with bullet points outlining his vision for the dealership's new direction. The first step is transparency. From now on, every deal will be straightforward. No hidden fees, no last-minute add-ons. If a customer walks out of here feeling misled, then we've failed. Daniel, standing near the back of the room, raised his hand hesitantly. Mr. Carter, that's ambitious, but won't that hurt our numbers? Cody always said customers expect to be upsold. Andrew smiled, appreciating the courage it took for Daniel to speak up. It's true that transparency might not yield immediate results, he admitted, but in the long run, it builds trust. Customers who trust us will come back and they'll tell others about their experience. That's how we'll grow, not by squeezing every dollar out of them, but by earning their loyalty. The room was quiet for a moment as the employees absorbed his words. Then George spoke up, his tone measured but supportive. I've been here a long time, and I've seen what happens when customers feel cheated. They don't come back. If we're going to do this, we need to commit to it fully. Half measures won't cut it. Andrew nodded, feeling a flicker of pride at George's shift in attitude. Exactly. This isn't a temporary fix. It's a complete overhaul, and it starts with how we treat our customers and each other. Before Andrew could continue, the door opened and Felix and Susan Brown stepped into the room. Their presence caught everyone's attention, and a few employees exchanged curious glances. Andrew smiled warmly and invited them in, sensing this moment could reinforce his message. "Everyone, this is Felix and Susan," Andrew said, addressing the team. "They were here 2 days ago to trade in their son's car, and I think their story is something we all need to hear." Felix stepped forward, his hands clasped together tightly, as though holding on to the courage to speak. Susan stood by his side, her smile warm but tinged with sadness. The employees shifted in their seats, intrigued but unsure of what to expect. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," Felix began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I wasn't planning on talking to all of you today, but when Mr. Carter reached out, he said you might find our story meaningful. So, here it is." He took a deep breath, glancing at Susan for support before continuing. "A few years ago, we lost our son, Matt. He was a firefighter, one of the best, and that car out there, it was his. It was his pride and joy, and after he passed, it became a way for us to hold on to him. But as time went on, maintaining it became too expensive for us. We didn't want to let it go, but we felt we had no other choice." Felix paused, his voice catching slightly. Susan reached out, gently squeezing his arm. "When we came here," he continued, "we were hoping for understanding, respect. And I'll be honest, we didn't feel that at first. But then Mr. Carter stepped in, and everything changed." Susan spoke up, her voice soft but firm. "He didn't just see us as a transaction. He saw us as people. He listened to us, and he gave us a way to keep Matt's memory alive. That's something we'll never forget." The room was silent, the weight of Felix and Susan's words hanging in the air. Andrew stepped forward, his tone steady but impassioned. "This is what I'm talking about. Customers like Felix and Susan aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're people, with stories, with emotions. When we treat them with respect, we don't just gain their business, we gain their trust." He turned back to Felix and Susan, his voice softening. "Thank you both for sharing your story. It means a lot to all of us." The Browns nodded, their gratitude evident. As they left the room, employees exchanged glances, the weight of the moment settling in. Andrew looked around the room, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. "This is the kind of dealership I want to build," he said, his voice rising with conviction. "One where people feel valued, not just for their money, but for who they are. If we can do that, the numbers will follow." The employees began nodding, some hesitantly, others with growing confidence. George, who had been silent for most of the story, finally spoke. "All right, Mr. Carter," he said, his tone resolute. "Let's give it a shot. Let's do it your way." Andrew smiled, feeling the tide begin to turn. This was only the first step, but it was a critical one. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, he felt the team was ready to walk it with him. Together. The energy in the room shifted palpably after George's words. Andrew seized the moment, sensing the team was finally opening up to the changes he envisioned. "Thank you, George," he said with a nod. "I know this won't be easy, but it's worth it. And to ensure we're all moving in the same direction, I want to introduce something new, our Customer Satisfaction Initiative." He turned back to the whiteboard and pointed to a section labeled New Performance Metrics. "Starting immediately, bonuses won't be tied solely to sales figures anymore. Instead, we're introducing a system where customer feedback plays a central role. Every review, every survey, every word of appreciation or complaint will factor into how we measure success." A murmur rippled through the room, a mixture of curiosity and concern. Daniel, standing near the back, raised his hand again. "Mr. Carter, I think it's a great idea. But what if a customer has a bad experience because of something out of our control, like a delayed shipment or a technical issue? Andrew smiled, appreciating Daniel's thoughtful question. Good point. This isn't about punishing anyone for things outside their control. It's about accountability where it matters. We'll review feedback collectively and learn from it. If it's something we can improve, we'll work on it together. This is about building a culture of growth, not fear. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. This system isn't meant to burden you. It's meant to empower you. Customers trust individuals, not corporations. If they leave here feeling like you went above and beyond, that's what they'll remember. And that's what will bring them back. The room grew quieter as the team digested his words. Andrew could see a mix of skepticism and cautious optimism on their faces. George leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought. It's different, I'll give you that, he said slowly. But if it works the way you say, it might actually bring some pride back into the job. Andrew smiled, his tone softening. That's the goal, George. Pride, trust, and respect for ourselves and our customers. Before the meeting ended, Andrew handed out materials explaining the new initiative, detailing how feedback would be collected and shared transparently. He emphasized the importance of teamwork and accountability, promising to be as open with them as he expected them to be with their customers. As the team began to disperse, Andrew caught Daniel on his way out. Daniel, he said, pulling him aside. I noticed how you handled that customer yesterday. You're already showing the kind of service I want this dealership to be known for. Daniel smiled, his nervousness giving way to genuine pride. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I just want to do the right thing. And you will, Andrew said firmly. I'll make sure of it. As Daniel left, Andrew looked around the now empty lounge. Change was in motion. The foundation was set, but the work was only beginning. The following week, Carter Automotive felt different. The energy on the showroom floor was no longer clouded by the same tension and pressure that had dominated before. Employees moved with a cautious optimism, adjusting to the new policies Andrew had implemented. The change wasn't seamless. There were still moments of uncertainty, but progress was palpable. Daniel Lopez stood near the entrance, reviewing paperwork with Rebecca Sanders, a single mother who had come in the day before to inquire about trading in her car. She had been hesitant at first, worried about hidden fees and being pressured into a deal she couldn't afford. But after her initial meeting with Daniel, she returned, a little more confident this time. All right, Miss Sanders, Daniel said, his tone friendly but professional as he handed her a neatly printed breakdown of the financing options. This shows everything, itemized. No surprises, no extras. If you're comfortable with this, we can move forward. Rebecca studied the paper carefully, her brow furrowing slightly as she considered the numbers. This actually makes sense, she said, a note of surprise in her voice. Every other dealership I went to kept adding fees I didn't understand. I really appreciate how clear this is. Daniel smiled, relieved. That's what we're here for. We want you to feel good about this decision, not stressed out. Rebecca nodded and signed the paperwork, her shoulders visibly relaxing as she handed the forms back to Daniel. Thank you. Honestly, this is the first time I've felt like someone's actually listened to me while buying a car. Andrew, who had been observing from a distance, stepped forward, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. Ms. Sanders, he said, his tone warm and genuine. Thank you for trusting us. Your feedback means a lot. And Daniel, great job. This is exactly the kind of experience we're aiming for. Rebecca smiled, a little flustered at Andrew's direct praise. It's no problem, she said. I'll definitely recommend you to my friends. As Rebecca left, Andrew turned to Daniel. That was excellent work. How does it feel? Daniel hesitated, then smiled. Honestly? A lot better than pushing extras no one needs. Good, Andrew said with a nod. Keep it up. You're setting the standard. As Daniel returned to the desk, Andrew turned his attention to the rest of the team. Things were improving, but he knew not everyone was fully on board yet. The transformation of Carter Automotive was far from complete, and challenges still loomed on the horizon. Later that afternoon, Andrew walked through the showroom, taking in the activity. A few salesmen were still adjusting to the new approach, their conversations with customers occasionally punctuated by awkward pauses as they figured out how to pitch with transparency instead of pressure. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. What caught Andrew's attention next, however, was not progress. It was a problem. Near the financing desk, George Wilson stood with a customer who seemed agitated, his voice rising in frustration. "What do you mean this rate isn't negotiable?" the man said, crossing his arms. "I've been to 2 other places, and both offered better deals." George, looking slightly flustered, glanced over at Andrew, who nodded subtly for him to continue. Taking a breath, George adjusted his tone, his voice calmer. "I understand your concern, sir. The rate we've offered is based on your current credit history and what our lenders have approved. But what I can do is go over everything in detail to make sure you're comfortable with the breakdown." The man's posture softened slightly as George laid out the paperwork, explaining each part of the financing terms with patience. Andrew watched closely, noting how George adapted to the new system, taking the time to address the customer's concerns instead of brushing them off. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it ended with a handshake and a signed agreement. As the customer walked out, George exhaled and turned to Andrew, who approached with a faint smile. "That wasn't exactly smooth," George admitted. "But I guess that's part of the process now." Andrew clapped a hand on George's shoulder. "It wasn't smooth, but it was honest. And that's what matters. The more we stick to this, the more natural it'll feel, for us and for the customers." George nodded thoughtfully. "I get it. It's just different, but I'll stick with it." As the day wound down, Andrew gathered the team together for a brief meeting. "Today, we made progress," he said, his tone even but encouraging. "It wasn't perfect, but every step counts. Rebecca left here ready to recommend us to her friends. George just turned a frustrated customer into a satisfied one. That's what this is about, earning trust, one interaction at a time." The employees nodded, some more confidently than others, but there was a sense of shared purpose in the room that hadn't been there before. Andrew could feel the shift, a slow but steady momentum building. As the team dispersed, he stayed behind for a moment, looking out at the showroom floor. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time he believed they were on the right path. The tension at Carter Automotive began to mount as the impact of Langley Motors' aggressive tactics became evident. Over the past week, several customers had cancelled their appointments or pulled out of negotiations, citing offers from Langley Motors that seemed too good to refuse. Andrew had been expecting resistance, but Langley's escalation went beyond competition. It was a direct attack. Standing in his office, Andrew reviewed the latest reports. The numbers showed a dip in sales, and while customer satisfaction scores had risen slightly, it wasn't enough to counter the financial hit. The door opened and Daniel stepped in, holding a folder. His expression was serious, almost grim. "Mr. Carter, I think you need to see this," Daniel said, placing the folder on Andrew's desk. Andrew opened it to find printouts of online reviews and screenshots of social media posts. Many of them were negative, accusing Carter Automotive of misleading practices or subpar service. The problem? None of these complaints were from verified customers. "This has to be Langley," Daniel said, frustration lacing his voice. "They're planting fake reviews to scare people off." Andrew leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "It's not just the fake reviews," he said. "Look at the timing. Every one of these posts went up right after Langley launched their latest campaign. They're trying to undermine us completely." Daniel nodded, but his eyes were determined. "What do we do about it?" Andrew stood, pacing the room as he formulated a plan. "We can't stoop to their level, but we need to fight back with facts, transparency, and support from our real customers." He picked up the phone and called a team meeting. Within minutes, the staff had gathered in the showroom, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. Andrew stood at the center, holding up one of the printouts. "Team, we have a problem," he began. "Langley Motors is playing dirty, planting fake reviews to damage our reputation." Murmurs spread through the group, but Andrew raised a hand to quiet them. "We're not going to retaliate with the same tactics. Instead, we're going to focus on the truth. I want each of you to reach out to recent customers, people we know had a positive experience, and ask them to share their stories. We'll counter these lies with real voices." George spoke up, his tone skeptical but engaged. "And what if that's not enough? Langley's got deep pockets. They can outspend us on marketing." Andrew met his gaze, his voice steady. "They might have more money, but we have integrity. That's something they can't buy. Let's remind people why they can trust us." The team nodded, and Andrew felt a flicker of hope. The battle was just beginning, but he wasn't going to let Langley Motors win without a fight. Let me know when to continue with the next part of Chapter 6, seamlessly picking up from where this segment ends. It will maintain the tension and connection needed for the progression of the story. The next day, Andrew stood near the entrance of the dealership, observing as the team worked to implement his plan. Daniel had already contacted several recent customers, and a few had responded positively, promising to leave honest reviews online. Rebecca Sanders, in particular, had been enthusiastic, offering to share her story on social media about how Carter Automotive had helped her without pressuring her into unnecessary extras. Meanwhile, Andrew knew they needed more than just positive reviews. They needed to bring in new customers to offset the ones Langley Motors had lured away. As he thought through their next steps, George approached, holding a notepad. "I've been thinking, Mr. Carter," George began, his tone hesitant but thoughtful. "What if we hold an open house, like a community event? Invite people in to meet the team, ask questions, maybe even offer a few perks like free car inspections." Andrew considered it, nodding slowly. "It's a good idea. It shows we're not just here to sell cars. We're part of this community. Let's make it happen." By mid-morning, the entire team was involved in planning the open house. Flyers were printed, social media posts were drafted, and local vendors were contacted to provide light refreshments. The event was scheduled for the weekend, giving the team just a few days to prepare. Despite the flurry of activity, Langley Motors wasn't slowing down. Another wave of fake reviews appeared online that afternoon, and Andrew knew they were trying to drown out any positive momentum Carter Automotive was building. He addressed the team again, rallying their spirits. "Remember, Langley Motors is throwing everything they have at us because they see us as a threat. That means we're doing something right. Stay focused on our customers and let the results speak for themselves." The words seemed to bolster the team, and Andrew couldn't help but feel a spark of pride. For the first time, the employees weren't just going through the motions, they were genuinely invested in the dealership's new direction. As the day wound down, Andrew checked his email and noticed a message from Sarah Green, a former employee of Langley Motors. The subject line read, "I can help." Intrigued, he opened it and began reading. Sarah claimed she had insider knowledge of the deceptive practices Langley was using, and she was willing to share it. Andrew's mind raced. This could be the break they needed to turn the tide, but he also knew it was a delicate situation. If handled poorly, it could backfire. He closed his laptop, determination hardening his resolve. They were up against a giant, but giants could be toppled. All it took was the right strategy and the right people. The open house event at Carter Automotive was in full swing. Balloons in the company's colors swayed gently in the breeze, and the aroma of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air. Customers, both old and new, wandered through the lot, chatting with staff and inspecting cars. For the first time in months, the dealership felt alive, not just with business, but with genuine connection. Andrew moved through the crowd, stopping to greet familiar faces and introduce himself to new ones. He noticed Rebecca Sanders near the refreshments table, talking animatedly with a small group about her experience at the dealership. Her voice carried across the lot, warm and enthusiastic, and Andrew couldn't help but smile. Customers like Rebecca were exactly what Carter Automotive needed, advocates who believed in what the dealership stood for. Meanwhile, George Wilson and Daniel Lopez were working with customers, answering questions and offering free vehicle inspections. The inspections had proven a smart addition to the event. Several attendees mentioned they hadn't planned on buying, but appreciated the gesture and were now considering it. George, who had initially been skeptical about the dealership's new direction, seemed energized, his demeanor more approachable than ever. But as Andrew continued his rounds, he spotted a man standing near the edge of the lot, observing the scene with a clipboard in hand. The man's tailored suit and calculating gaze were unmistakable. He was from Langley Motors. Andrew's jaw tightened, but he took a deep breath to steady himself before approaching. "Enjoying the event?" Andrew asked, keeping his tone even. The man offered a thin smile. "Quite the turnout," he said. "Nice to see so many people interested in—" what was it? Transparency. Andrew didn't take the bait. "That's right. We're building something lasting here. It's not just about cars. It's about trust, something our customers value." The Langley representative's smile didn't falter, but there was an edge to his voice as he replied, "Trust is great, Mr. Carter, but let's not pretend that goodwill alone will pay the bills. We both know this business is about the bottom line." Andrew met his gaze steadily. "You're right, but we also both know that cutting corners to hit that bottom line catches up with you eventually. My team and I are in this for the long haul." The man gave a small chuckle, as if amused, before turning to leave. "Best of luck, Mr. Carter. You'll need it." Andrew watched him go, the man's words lingering in his mind like a warning. As he turned back toward the event, Daniel hurried over, his expression urgent. "Mr. Carter," Daniel said, lowering his voice, "Sarah Green's here. She said she brought something important." Andrew's heart quickened. Sarah, the former Langley employee, had emailed him earlier in the week, offering to share information about Langley Motors' tactics. He hadn't expected her to show up here. "Where is she?" he asked. Daniel motioned toward the service area. "She's waiting by the inspection bay." Andrew nodded, excusing himself from the crowd. This could be the opportunity they needed to push back against Langley, but he knew it had to be handled carefully. He made his way to the inspection bay, preparing himself for whatever Sarah had to reveal. Let me know when to continue with the second part of Chapter 7, seamlessly picking up from where this segment ends to maintain the narrative flow. Andrew found Sarah Green leaning against a workbench near the inspection bay, her arms crossed and a guarded expression on her face. She was younger than he'd expected, likely in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that darted around the room as if scanning for threats. In her hands, she clutched a manila folder stuffed with documents. "Ms. Green," Andrew greeted, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure if you'd follow through." Sarah shook his hand briefly, her grip firm but quick. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, glancing over her shoulder. "Langley doesn't exactly take kindly to people leaving, let alone talking." Andrew gestured toward a quieter corner of the bay. Let's step over here. Whatever you have to share, you're safe here. Once they were out of earshot, Sarah placed the folder on the workbench and opened it. Inside were contracts, spreadsheets, and internal memos, all bearing Langley Motors' logo. She tapped the papers, her voice low but steady. This is what I've been sitting on for months. Hidden fees, predatory financing tactics, false advertising, it's all here. Langley has been targeting customers with bad credit, locking them into deals they can't afford, and burying the evidence. Andrew's brows furrowed as he sifted through the documents. The details were damning. Charts tracking profits from added fees, training guides encouraging salespeople to push unnecessary warranties, and even emails from management instructing employees to mislead customers. "This is worse than I thought," he muttered. Sarah crossed her arms again, her expression hardening. "It's not just bad, it's deliberate. They've been doing this for years, and they get away with it because no one holds them accountable. If you're serious about standing up to them, this could be your leverage." Andrew closed the folder, his mind racing. "Why are you giving this to me? What's your angle?" Sarah hesitated before answering. "I left Langley because I couldn't stomach what they were doing anymore. But the truth is, I can't stop them on my own. You're already pushing back, and from what I've seen, you're doing it the right way. If anyone can expose them, it's you." Andrew studied her for a moment, then nodded. "This is invaluable, Sarah. But it's also risky, for both of us. Langley won't sit back if this goes public." "I know," Sarah said, her voice firm. "But it's the right thing to do." Andrew extended his hand again, this time with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. I promise you, we'll use this to make a difference." As they shook hands, Andrew felt the weight of what lay ahead. The fight against Langley Motors had just escalated, and with Sarah's evidence in hand, he knew the stakes were higher than ever. But he also knew they finally had the ammunition they needed to stand a chance. As he returned to the open house, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle wasn't over, it was just beginning. The press conference had been hastily organized, but the turnout was larger than Andrew had expected. Reporters, community members, and even a few local business owners gathered in the lot outside Carter Automotive, their curiosity piqued by the bold promises in the event announcement. "Carter Automotive fights back. A commitment to transparency," the headline had read, signaling that something significant was about to unfold. Andrew stood at the podium, the folder Sarah Green had given him resting just out of sight on the small table beside him. Behind him, the Carter Automotive team stood in quiet solidarity, their presence a statement in itself. To his right, Rebecca Sanders and Felix Brown sat in the front row, their presence lending a personal touch to the event. Andrew took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium as he began to speak. "Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here," he started, his voice steady but charged with determination. "Over the past few weeks, Carter Automotive has faced unprecedented challenges. We've been the target of false accusations, dishonest tactics, and relentless attempts to undermine the trust we've worked so hard to build." He paused, letting his words sink in. The reporters leaned forward, their pens poised over notepads. But instead of retaliating with the same underhanded methods, we've chosen a different path, a path of integrity and transparency. Today, I'm here to share the truth, not just about Carter Automotive, but about the tactics being used by some of our competitors. Andrew reached for the folder, flipping it open to reveal the damning evidence Sarah had provided. This folder contains internal documents from Langley Motors outlining practices that are not only unethical, but also harmful to the very customers they claim to serve. Hidden fees, misleading contracts, predatory financing, this is the reality behind their flashy marketing campaigns. A collective murmur swept through the crowd, and several reporters exchanged glances, their pens moving furiously. Andrew held up one of the documents for everyone to see, a spreadsheet detailing profits from hidden fees. This isn't speculation, it's proof. And it comes directly from someone who worked inside Langley Motors and couldn't stay silent any longer. He glanced toward Sarah, who stood at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed but her expression resolute. Her presence, though understated, added credibility to everything he was saying. "We're not here to play the victim," Andrew continued, his voice rising with conviction. "We're here to set an example. Carter Automotive is committed to being a dealership where honesty and fairness aren't just slogans. They're our foundation." The crowd's attention was locked on him now, the atmosphere electric with tension and anticipation. Andrew knew this was only the beginning. Exposing Langley Motors publicly would have consequences, but he also knew it was a necessary step in reclaiming the trust of the community. Andrew let the weight of his words settle before continuing, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Our decision to fight back isn't about vengeance. It's about accountability. Langley Motors has used its influence and resources to manipulate customers and stifle competition, but their time of operating unchecked ends today." He motioned toward Rebecca Sanders, who stood nervously but determinedly in the front row. Rebecca, like so many others, trusted us to treat her fairly, and we did. Her story reflects the type of relationships we aim to build at Carter Automotive, ones built on trust and mutual respect. Rebecca stepped up to the podium, clutching a small piece of paper in her hands. She hesitated for a moment, then began to speak. "I'm not used to being in front of crowds," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But I felt it was important to share why I came back to Carter Automotive after dealing with other dealerships, including Langley Motors." She glanced briefly at Andrew, who gave her an encouraging nod. "At Langley, I felt like just another number, pressured into signing papers I didn't understand and pushed into a deal that wasn't right for me. But here, it was different." Daniel, one of the salesmen, took the time to explain everything clearly. There were no tricks, no hidden fees. For the first time, I felt like someone actually cared about what I needed. Her voice grew steadier as she continued. "I know I'm just one person, but I believe businesses like Carter Automotive are the ones we should be supporting. They've shown me that integrity still matters, and I hope more businesses follow their lead." The crowd erupted into applause, Rebecca's heartfelt words striking a chord with everyone present. Andrew stepped back to the podium, his expression one of gratitude. "Thank you, Rebecca. Your story is why we're doing this. It's why we won't let Langley, or anyone else, diminish the values we stand for." At that moment, Sarah Green stepped forward. Though she had been reluctant to take the spotlight, the response to Rebecca's story gave her the courage to speak. "I worked for Langley Motors for 3 years, she began, her voice firm but restrained. "I saw firsthand how they trained employees to upsell unnecessary add-ons and manipulate financing terms. I left because I couldn't be part of it anymore. I came here today because I believe Carter Automotive is trying to do things differently, and I want to help expose the truth." The reporters sprang into action, cameras flashing and questions flying. Andrew raised a hand to calm the crowd. "This isn't just about Carter Automotive versus Langley Motors," he said. "It's about the kind of community we want to create, a community where businesses are held to a higher standard and customers know they're valued." As the conference wound down, Andrew looked out at the crowd, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The battle was far from over, but today was a victory, a step toward restoring trust and integrity in an industry that had lost its way. He knew Langley Motors would retaliate, but for now he allowed himself a moment to reflect on how far they'd come. Together, they were proving that change was possible. The aftermath of the press conference brought an undeniable energy to Carter Automotive. Customers who had attended or watched the event online began flooding the dealership with inquiries, not just about vehicles, but about the company's values. For the first time in months, there was a palpable sense of pride among the employees. They weren't just selling cars, they were part of something bigger. Andrew spent the next few days in constant motion, meeting with his team to ensure they were equipped to handle the influx of interest. The open house event had proven effective, but he knew momentum was fragile. Langley Motors wouldn't let the exposure from the press conference go unanswered. He needed his team united and prepared. In the middle of the week, George approached Andrew with an idea. "Mr. Carter," he began, holding a clipboard filled with notes, "I've been thinking. With all the attention we're getting, we need to show people that this isn't just talk. Let's host another community event, but this time, let's make it bigger. Something that really drives home what Carter Automotive stands for." Andrew listened carefully, nodding as George explained his vision. "We could partner with local charities," George continued. "Maybe host a fundraiser or offer free vehicle inspections for anyone who brings in donations. It's not just good PR, it's a way to give back." "I like it," Andrew said, a small smile forming. "It's bold, and it shows that we're committed to this community in more ways than one. Let's start planning." The team rallied around the idea, brainstorming ways to involve both customers and local businesses. Daniel suggested a raffle, with prizes ranging from free oil changes to gift cards donated by nearby shops. Rebecca, now a vocal advocate for the dealership, offered to help spread the word through her social media channels. Even Sarah Green, still adjusting to her new role as an informal whistleblower, volunteered to assist with logistics. As the plans came together, Andrew noticed a shift in the team dynamic. Employees who had been skeptical of the new direction were now engaging with enthusiasm. George, in particular, had stepped into a leadership role, mentoring younger staff and helping them adapt to the dealership's new values. It was a transformation Andrew had hoped for, but hadn't expected so quickly. By Friday, the details for the event were finalized, and Andrew called a team meeting to review everything. As he stood in front of his employees, he felt a surge of pride. "You've all done incredible work this week," he said. "This event is more than just a chance to bring in customers. It's an opportunity to show everyone who we are and what we stand for." The room buzzed with quiet excitement, the team's collective energy building toward the weekend. Andrew knew there was still much work to be done, but for the first time in a long while, he felt confident they were heading in the right direction. The weekend arrived, and the dealership was transformed into the hub of a community gathering. Banners bearing the Carter Automotive logo flanked the entrance reading, "A commitment to community and integrity." Rows of chairs were set up under a large tent, while tables offered refreshments and flyers about the dealership's initiatives. Nearby, volunteers from local charities manned booths to collect donations, creating an atmosphere that felt less like a corporate event and more like a neighborhood celebration. Customers and community members began to trickle in, many drawn by curiosity and the promise of free vehicle inspections. By mid-morning, the lot was bustling with activity. Children darted between displays of vehicles, their parents chatting with employees or browsing the offerings from local vendors. Andrew moved through the crowd, greeting attendees and checking in with his team. Near the raffle table, Rebecca Sanders was deep in conversation with a small group of visitors. She held a clipboard, collecting names and phone numbers for the prize draw, but her focus was on sharing her personal story. "What impressed me the most wasn't just how they treated me. It was how they listened," she said, her enthusiasm drawing nods of agreement from those around her. Andrew paused nearby, listening as Rebecca's words resonated with the group. It was moments like these that reminded him why this transformation was worth the effort. He turned his attention to the inspection bay, where George and Daniel were hard at work. They had organized the inspections into a smooth operation, with vehicles lining up and moving efficiently through the process. "Hey, Mr. Carter," Daniel called, waving him over. "You've got to see this." Andrew approached as George finished inspecting an older sedan. The driver, a middle-aged woman, was speaking animatedly. "I've been driving this car for years, but I've never had anyone walk me through everything so clearly," she said, smiling at George. "It's nice to know someone cares about more than just getting me to trade it in." George chuckled, wiping his hands on a rag. "Well, that's the goal. If you ever decide to upgrade, though, we've got a few options I think you'd love." The woman laughed and thanked him, driving off with a smile. Andrew clapped George on the shoulder. "Great work. This is exactly what we're about." George shrugged, but there was a spark of pride in his eyes. "You know, I wasn't sure about all this at first, but it's starting to feel right." As the day wore on, the sense of community only grew stronger. Donations piled up at the charity booths, and customers lingered, enjoying the positive atmosphere. By the time the event wound down, Andrew felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction. Carter Automotive wasn't just repairing its reputation, it was becoming a part of something much larger. Standing by the entrance as the last attendees left, Andrew watched the team pack up with tired but contented smiles. They had taken another significant step forward, and for the first time, Andrew saw not just a dealership, but a family, united by a shared purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. The success of the community event propelled Carter Automotive into the spotlight. Over the next few days, glowing reviews and social media posts flooded in, highlighting not only the dealership's commitment to honesty, but also its active role in the community. Customers who had attended the event praised the free inspections, the genuine interactions with staff, and the overall welcoming atmosphere. For the first time in months, the momentum felt undeniably positive. But Andrew knew better than to rest easy. Langley Motors had remained ominously quiet in the days following the press conference and the event. Too quiet. Andrew suspected they were planning their next move, and his instincts were proven correct when Daniel burst into his office one morning, clutching a newspaper. "Mr. Carter, you need to see this," Daniel said, placing the paper on Andrew's desk. The front page headline read, "Langley Motors fires back, claims of defamation spark legal threats." Andrew scanned the article, his jaw tightening as he read Langley Motors' accusations. According to the report, Langley had publicly denied the allegations brought up during the press conference, calling them baseless and malicious. They threatened legal action, accusing Carter Automotive of deliberately damaging their reputation. Worse still, Langley was claiming that the documents Sarah Green had provided were fabricated. "This is a direct attack," Andrew muttered, his fingers tightening around the edges of the paper. "They're trying to discredit us before the truth gains more traction." Daniel hesitated, his voice uncertain. "Do you think, could this hurt us? I mean, people are finally starting to trust us again. What if Langley's claims make them doubt us?" Andrew stood, his mind racing through their options. "We don't back down," he said firmly. "The evidence we have is solid, and Sarah's testimony is credible. Langley is playing a dangerous game, and they're counting on intimidation to silence us." He picked up the phone and called an emergency meeting with the team. Within an hour, the staff was gathered in the lounge, their expressions a mix of concern and determination. Andrew addressed them with the same conviction that had carried them through the past few weeks. "Langley Motors is trying to scare us into silence," he began, holding up the newspaper for everyone to see, "but we're not going to let them rewrite the narrative. We have the truth on our side, and we're going to use it." He turned to Sarah, who sat near the back, her face pale but resolute. "Sarah, you've been brave enough to share what you know. If you're willing, I think it's time we take this evidence to the next level, formal legal action." The room fell silent as Sarah considered his words. Finally she nodded, her voice steady despite the tension. "If it helps stop them, I'll do whatever it takes." Andrew smiled, his pride in her courage evident. "Good, because this isn't just about Carter Automotive anymore. It's about holding Langley accountable for everyone they've hurt." The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose, but Andrew knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. As the team dispersed, he stayed behind to finalize their next steps, determined to face whatever came next with integrity and resolve. The following morning, Andrew sat across from his lawyer, Emily Strauss, in her office downtown. The sunlight streaming through the windows did little to soften the gravity of their conversation. On the desk between them lay Sarah Green's folder of evidence, now bolstered with additional testimonies from former Langley Motors employees who had come forward after the press conference. Emily flipped through the documents, her sharp eyes scanning each page with precision. "This is strong," she said finally, leaning back in her chair. "Langley's claim that these documents are fabricated won't hold up under scrutiny, but launching a formal legal case against them is going to attract more attention, good and bad." Andrew nodded, his expression resolute. "We're prepared for that. Langley needs to be held accountable, and we're not going to let them bully us into backing down." Emily raised an eyebrow. "It's not just Langley you need to worry about. This case is going to be a battle, not just in court but in the public eye. Are you ready for that level of exposure?" Andrew's jaw tightened. "We've worked too hard to turn things around to let fear stop us now. My team is ready, and so am I." Satisfied with his determination, Emily began outlining the next steps. "We'll file the suit within the week. In the meantime, you need to prepare a public statement. Transparency is your strongest asset, so use it." Later that afternoon, back at the dealership, Andrew gathered his core team, George, Daniel, and Sarah, in his office. He relayed Emily's advice and discussed how they could keep the public on their side. "We need to show people that this isn't just a corporate feud," he said. "It's about standing up for fairness and accountability." George leaned forward, his tone thoughtful. "What if we double down on customer outreach? Keep reminding people why they trust us. Positive stories can drown out the noise Langley is trying to create." Daniel nodded in agreement. Rebecca's story got a lot of attention at the event. If we can encourage more customers to share their experiences, it'll help counter Langley's narrative. Sarah, sitting quietly up to this point, finally spoke. "I'm willing to go public with my story. If that means doing interviews or speaking directly to the media, I'll do it." Andrew looked at her, admiration in his eyes. "That's a brave offer, Sarah, but only if you're absolutely comfortable. This could put you in the spotlight in ways you might not expect." She took a deep breath. "I've thought about it. Langley took advantage of people for years. If my voice can help stop them, it's worth it." With a plan forming, the team dispersed to begin implementing the next phase of their strategy. Over the coming days, Carter Automotive ramped up its outreach efforts. They published videos featuring satisfied customers, shared stories from the community event, and issued a formal statement reaffirming their commitment to transparency. As the lawsuit was officially filed, Andrew braced himself for the next wave of challenges. Langley Motors wouldn't go down without a fight, but for the first time, it felt like the tide was turning. The battle was no longer just about Carter Automotive. It was about redefining what integrity looked like in an industry that had too often abandoned it. The lawsuit against Langley Motors sent shockwaves through the local business community. News outlets quickly picked up the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath battle, with Carter Automotive taking a stand against corporate malpractice. Public interest surged, and the pressure began mounting on both sides. Inside Carter Automotive, the atmosphere was a mix of tension and determination. Andrew kept a close eye on his team, ensuring they stayed focused despite the growing attention. George had taken charge of customer interactions, making sure everyone who walked through the door felt the dealership's renewed commitment to transparency. Daniel, meanwhile, managed the dealership's online presence, sharing stories of positive customer experiences and countering any lingering doubts fueled by Langley's smear campaign. Despite the progress, Andrew knew Langley wouldn't stay silent for long. His fears were confirmed when a letter arrived at the dealership bearing Langley Motors' logo. Andrew read it carefully, his jaw tightening as the weight of its contents sank in. Langley was threatening to countersue, claiming that Carter Automotive's actions had caused them significant financial harm. Andrew called an emergency meeting with Emily Strauss and his core team. As they gathered in the conference room, he laid the letter on the table. "This is Langley's latest move," he said grimly. "They're claiming that we've damaged their business and reputation. They're trying to turn this into a war of attrition." Emily leaned forward, her expression calm but serious. "This was expected. It's a classic intimidation tactic. They're hoping to force you into backing down by making the fight seem too costly." Andrew glanced around the room, gauging the reactions of his team. George looked thoughtful, while Daniel's fists clenched in frustration. Sarah, however, seemed unfazed. "We can't let this scare us," she said firmly. "They're bluffing because they know the truth is on our side." Emily nodded in agreement. Sarah's right. Their countersuit doesn't hold much weight legally, but it could create a PR problem if we're not careful. We need to keep our narrative clear and consistent. Andrew took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Then we stick to the plan: transparency, integrity, and truth. If we waver now, Langley wins without even setting foot in court." Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly to reinforce Carter Automotive's reputation. They reached out to community leaders and local businesses, many of whom expressed support for Andrew's stance against Langley. Customers continued to share glowing reviews online, their stories bolstering the dealership's image as a beacon of fairness. Meanwhile, Sarah agreed to give her first on-camera interview, a step that would put her directly in the spotlight. As the cameras rolled, she spoke candidly about her experiences at Langley Motors, detailing the unethical practices she had witnessed. Her words were powerful, her voice steady despite the pressure. "Working at Langley, I saw people being taken advantage of every day," she said. "When I realized I couldn't change things from the inside, I knew I had to leave. Carter Automotive gave me the opportunity to do the right thing, and I'm proud to stand with them in this fight." The interview aired on a local news channel, and the response was immediate. Viewers praised Sarah's courage, and public sentiment shifted further in Carter Automotive's favor. Andrew watched the coverage from his office, feeling a mix of pride and determination. They were gaining ground, but the fight was far from over. Langley Motors would undoubtedly respond, and Andrew knew they needed to be ready for whatever came next. As the days passed, the ripples from Sarah's interview began to swell into waves. Customers, community leaders, and even former employees of Langley Motors reached out to Carter Automotive, sharing their support or offering their own experiences. Some former Langley employees anonymously confirmed Sarah's accounts, bolstering the credibility of her claims. Others, emboldened by her bravery, stepped forward publicly. The tide of public opinion was shifting in Carter Automotive's favor, but Andrew knew it was only a matter of time before Langley Motors made its next move. That move came sooner than expected. One morning, Andrew received an urgent call from Emily. Her tone was sharp, laced with urgency. "Andrew, turn on the local news. Langley's CEO just gave a press conference." Andrew quickly switched on the TV in his office, his stomach tightening as the screen flickered to life. The sleek, confident figure of Thomas Langley stood at a podium, flanked by his legal team. His polished demeanor and rehearsed delivery made it clear this was a calculated performance. "We at Langley Motors are deeply disappointed by the baseless accusations being leveled against us," Thomas began, his tone smooth but authoritative. "We are a family-run business that has served this community for decades, and we take great pride in our reputation. Unfortunately, Carter Automotive has chosen to engage in a smear campaign using falsified documents and unsubstantiated claims to harm our standing." Andrew felt his jaw clench as Thomas continued. "We have full confidence in our legal team to address these claims, and we will be filing additional actions against Carter Automotive to recover damages. We will not allow our name to be tarnished by unprofessional and unethical tactics." The broadcast cut to a panel of commentators dissecting the press conference, speculating about the potential impact on both businesses. Andrew turned off the TV, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. Langley's words were carefully crafted to sow doubt, to paint Carter Automotive as the aggressor in the eyes of the public. Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. "Don't let this rattle you, Andrew. Thomas Langley is playing to his strengths, intimidation and optics. But we have the truth on our side, and their countersuit is full of holes. The more they push, the more desperate they'll look." Andrew took a deep breath, centering himself. "You're right. We can't get drawn into their theatrics. We need to keep focusing on what we're doing, building trust, serving our customers, and standing by our principles." That afternoon, Andrew gathered his team once more. The tension in the room was palpable, but Andrew met their gazes with calm determination. "Langley Motors is trying to drag us into the mud," he began. "But we're not going to stoop to their level. This isn't just a fight for Carter Automotive. It's a fight for every customer who's been misled and every business that believes in doing the right thing." George nodded, his arms crossed but his expression resolute. "So, what's the plan?" Andrew outlined the next steps: amplifying their customer stories, hosting another community event to show their continued commitment, and preparing their legal case with even greater precision. "We're not just defending ourselves," Andrew said. "We're proving that businesses can succeed with honesty and integrity." The team left the meeting reinvigorated, diving into their tasks with renewed purpose. Meanwhile, Andrew worked closely with Emily, refining their legal strategy and preparing for the battles ahead. Every piece of evidence, every customer testimony, every word they shared with the public had to be precise and unassailable. As the week drew to a close, Andrew reflected on how far they'd come. Langley Motors had underestimated them, assuming Carter Automotive would crumble under pressure. Instead, they had grown stronger, united by a shared vision and a commitment to change. Late that evening, Andrew stood alone in the showroom, the quiet space a stark contrast to the whirlwind of activity outside its doors. He looked out at the rows of vehicles, each one representing a promise to the customers who would drive them home. This wasn't just about selling cars. It was about creating a legacy of trust and integrity that would outlast any challenge. Andrew's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Rebecca Sanders, a simple text that read, "Thank you for fighting for people like me. We're with you." He smiled, a quiet but resolute determination settling over him. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but Carter Automotive had come too far to turn back now. Whatever Langley Motors threw at them next, Andrew and his team would be ready. Together, they would see this fight through to the end. The courtroom was filled with a quiet intensity as the final proceedings in the case between Carter Automotive and Langley Motors began. Rows of reporters and community members sat quietly, their eyes shifting between Andrew Carter and Thomas Langley, who both sat at opposite tables, each surrounded by their legal teams. The months of tension, media scrutiny, and legal battles had culminated in this moment. Andrew sat straight-backed, his expression calm but resolute. On the table before him lay the meticulously organized evidence his team had gathered: Sarah Green's testimony, the documents exposing Langley's predatory practices, and dozens of statements from former Langley employees and customers. Beside him, Emily Strauss flipped through her notes one last time, her confidence unwavering. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. What followed was a comprehensive presentation of arguments from both sides. Langley Motors' legal team focused on deflecting blame, painting the accusations as exaggerated and emphasizing their history as a long-standing business in the community. Thomas Langley himself took the stand, delivering a polished performance that attempted to project sincerity and responsibility. But it was Sarah Green's testimony that turned the tide. Calm and composed, she recounted her years at Langley Motors, detailing the pressure to engage in unethical practices and the punitive measures against employees who resisted. Her words were backed by the evidence she had provided, and her authenticity was palpable. When the opposing counsel attempted to discredit her, she stood firm, her answers concise and unwavering. "I left Langley Motors because I couldn't watch people being exploited anymore," Sarah said, her voice steady as she addressed the courtroom. "Carter Automotive gave me the chance to stand for something better, and I'm proud to be here today, speaking the truth." The room buzzed quietly with whispers, the weight of her testimony undeniable. When Andrew took the stand next, he built on Sarah's words, emphasizing Carter Automotive's commitment to transparency and integrity. "We didn't pursue this case to attack Langley Motors," Andrew said, his voice clear and steady. "We pursued it to defend the principles we believe in: fairness, honesty, and respect for the people we serve. Businesses don't thrive because of the corners they cut or the tricks they play. They thrive because of trust, and that's what we're here to protect." By the time closing arguments were delivered, it was clear which side had the upper hand. Langley Motors had underestimated the strength of Carter Automotive's case, and now their years of misconduct were laid bare for everyone to see. As the judge announced the decision in favor of Carter Automotive, the courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and relieved sighs. Andrew allowed himself a small smile, shaking hands with Emily and his team. But as the noise settled, he turned his attention to the Langley Motors table, where Thomas Langley sat motionless, his face a mask of disbelief. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Andrew gave him a nod, not of victory, but of closure. With the case settled, the focus shifted back to the dealership. Andrew knew this wasn't just about defeating Langley, it was about the future Carter Automotive was building. In the weeks following the courtroom victory, Carter Automotive became a symbol of resilience and integrity. The story of the case spread far beyond Brooklyn, with news outlets across the country reporting on the dealership's stand against corporate malpractice. Customers flocked to the lot, many driven by admiration for what Carter Automotive had come to represent: a business willing to put people before profits. Andrew spent those weeks immersed in the day-to-day operations, reconnecting with his employees and customers. The triumph over Langley Motors wasn't just a legal victory, it was a defining moment for the dealership's identity. Andrew knew the real work began now, maintaining the trust they had fought so hard to earn. One sunny morning, Andrew stood in the middle of the showroom, watching his team in action. George was chatting with a long-time customer, his demeanor relaxed and confident. Daniel was walking a young couple through financing options, patiently answering their questions. Even Sarah, who had taken on a formal role in community outreach, was in the corner of the room, discussing plans for another charity event. The transformation was undeniable. Rebecca Sanders entered, carrying a tray of coffee as a thank you gesture for the team. She had become something of an ambassador for the dealership, frequently stopping by to encourage staff and share her story with new customers. "Looks like things are busier than ever," she said with a smile as she handed a cup to Andrew. "They are," Andrew replied, his voice carrying a note of pride. "But it's the kind of busy I've always wanted, one that's built on trust, not pressure." Rebecca nodded, her gaze sweeping the bustling showroom. "You've really done it. You've shown people that businesses can be honest and still succeed. That's rare." Andrew smiled but didn't linger on her praise. "It's not just me. It's this team, this community. They're the ones making it happen." That afternoon, Andrew called a meeting in the staff lounge. The employees gathered, their energy light but focused. For many, the journey from skepticism to belief in Andrew's vision had been transformative, and it showed in their enthusiasm. "First, I want to thank all of you," Andrew began, his tone sincere. "What we've accomplished over these past months wouldn't have been possible without your hard work and your belief in this new direction. We've turned a corner, not just for this dealership, but for what Carter Automotive stands for." He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "But this is only the beginning. The real measure of success is consistency. It's about continuing to show up every day with the same commitment to fairness, transparency, and respect. That's how we'll not only maintain what we've built, but grow it into something even greater." The room erupted in applause, the team's shared pride palpable. George spoke up, his voice carrying a note of humor. "So, does this mean we're getting a raise for all this good work?" Laughter filled the room, and Andrew chuckled. "Let's just say, if we keep going at this rate, raises won't be out of the question." After the meeting, Andrew returned to his office, where a framed photo of his late father sat on the corner of his desk. The photo, taken decades earlier, showed his father standing proudly in front of the first Carter Automotive location. Andrew picked it up, running a finger along the edge of the frame. "We did it, Dad," he said quietly. "We made it into something you'd be proud of." The following weekend, the dealership hosted another community event, this time a celebration of their victory and their renewed commitment to the neighborhood. The lot was filled with families, local vendors, and smiling faces. A restored version of the car that once belonged to Felix and Susan Brown's late son sat on display, drawing admiration and heartfelt comments from attendees. Felix and Susan were among the guests, their gratitude evident as they spoke with Andrew. "You've done more than fix this business," Felix said, his voice steady but emotional. "You've given people hope that there are still places where honesty matters." Andrew nodded, humbled by their words. "That means more to me than you know." As the sun set and the crowd began to thin, Andrew stood by the entrance of the dealership, looking out over the scene. The challenges they had faced, the sacrifices they had made, and the victories they had earned all led to this moment. Carter Automotive wasn't just a business anymore. It was a beacon, a testament to what could be achieved when people stood together for what was right. As the lights of the dealership illuminated the evening sky, Andrew felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and fraught with obstacles, but it had been worth every step. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together, united by the values that had carried them through. For Andrew Carter, this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a legacy, one built not on profits but on purpose, not on transactions but on trust. And that legacy would endure far beyond the lot of Carter Automotive, shining as an example for others to follow.